Today I want to take you through the beginning of a project that I just completed for a friend of mine. It is a machinist square. He is a violin maker and he wanted to have something, to decorate his workbench. And it's really cool to have this kind of project. It's something that I probably in the next few years won't have the time to take a small project like this. But as a beginning engraver, I think that it's important to take on small projects because it gives you an opportunity to be in front of the bench, not working on practice plates, working on something you can put in someone's hands, which they could possibly show off and at least get some advertising for yourself to let people know what you do. And it's a practical project that's going to allow you to do something that, feels like a completed project, not just a practice plate. Because honestly, practice plates after a while can get kind of boring. I decided to do just a simple scroll design. We talked about it, and that's kind of what he wanted. Something just standard and beautiful. And so, as a beginning engraver, scroll can be very difficult. It can be very confusing, difficult, and the proportions, the way you lay it out, can be very hard to do if you're not used to it. I think that it's a great decorative art form and very classic, and serves to function as beautiful decoration for many, 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 many projects, from guns, jewelry, to a simple machinist square. So one of the things that when I had very first started, I had made a mistake. I was so ambitious, wanting to cut metal, wanting to cut projects, wanting to really just get going and get my graver in metal, that I neglected to really focus on learning the form and how to actually draw scroll. I'm not a great scroll drawer now. I improve every time I do it. Of course, I think that that's the key, is to draw as many scrolls as possible. But the key for me, and when I finally understood what it was, to get the actual scroll as perfect as possible so that every leaf that you draw within the scroll is proportional and lays out in the right way so that it looks natural. You can see where I've transferred the design to the metal. I'd noticed that up in the very corner, I guess the transfer solution I didn't actually get any transfer solution up in the corner, so the design on the border didn't transfer perfectly up there, which isn't a big problem. If it was something down in the design, it could serve as more of a problem. But being such a simple design, even if it happened within the body of the scroll, within the body of a leaf, then I could pencil it in and do just fine. So I decided to just proceed, and I'll deal with that part later. So when I cut, I always start with the outside border. This allows me to have a defined area within which I will engrave. I'm using a 90-degree graver from the Engraver standard set. When I took my beginning engraving class with Engraver, this is the geometries that we used. And before then, I was using the 116 and experimenting with different ones. And I find that when I was in class and was learning with the 90, it was just very straightforward and good, clean lines, without having to worry about rolling my graver to make some sort of bright cut or to flare the cut, which as a beginner can be a little bit daunting or distracting. Lately, I've been experimenting with it more. I'm coming pretty close to my year anniversary of my first engraving class, so I'm starting to branch out and experiment more. But with the 90, I find that it gave me the opportunity just to focus on gaining control of my graver, feeling the tip, understanding, sharpening, how to feel if your engraver's sharp, how it's cutting through metal, etc. So the 90 for me has been my standard go-to for the past almost year, and I've really enjoyed using that geometry. I'm using a Lindsay Classic foot control handpiece. Normally on the borders and scrolls and the outside of the leaves, I'm generally using it on a very like a long stroke setting. I want to get as deep as possible in the cut, create a lot of definition, and really create a bold line. You can see my vise. A few words about my vise. I'm not completely happy with it. I'm used to it. It's a GRS positioning vise. It's decent. It's fine. I think there are better designs probably. I've used a couple better ones. I've been doing some CAD work trying to come up with my own design, collaborating a little bit with Ray, and eventually I would like to produce my own vise that serves my purposes. Positioning vices, I think, can be very, very useful, and this vise, I could see it's useful for sure, but it's just not ergonomically. It's not what I think it benefits me the most. So maybe in the future I'll come up with something and try to make my own vise. So you can see where the design didn't transfer in the corner. I had missed a spot with the transfer solution. So now I got to deal with that in a simple way. I'm going to pencil the line in just to have something to follow. I like to keep a variety of tools on my bench: straight edges, pencils, anything that can help you along the way for design, drawing, etc., to make marks, to make temporary marks, let's say that, on your work surface. You'll see the graphite is a little bit shiny when it's applied to your work surface. So you'll be able to, what I have are two lights on my bench. One is a ring light that's around my scope. The other one is a task light that's offset to give me a little bit of contrast, especially into the cut. It will kind of reflect in the cut and give me a little more dimension through the scope. And so I find that turning off the ring light when I'm cutting a graphite line allows the graphite to reflect a little more from the task light. So that's very helpful. And now you can see I turned the ring light back up. That gives me a little bit better overall lighting. Find that if your drawing is accurate, then the key is just being accurate with your cuts. Engraver control, being patient, going slowly, and making sure that you have the sharpest tool possible when you cut. Another mistake I made as a beginner was not sharpening enough. If your tool isn't perfectly sharp, if your graver is not perfectly sharp, you're going to find that you'll have more slips. You'll have less control, especially when you're cutting curves. So when you start to cut scrolls or leaves, if you don't have a sharp graver, you're more likely to slip. With a sharp graver, you slip less. I won't say that you don't slip at all, and I'm sure, I don't know, but I'm sure that everyone slips a little. But having the sharpest tool possible really gives you an advantage, because the tool bites into the metal and really digs in and offers a good clean cut. The important thing when cutting scrolls and being accurate is to allow the vise to create your curve. Your radiuses aren't controlled by your hand or the tool moving. It's controlled by the vise. It does take some practice and some coordination to be able to do it correctly. The way that I'm holding the handpiece, I don't really think about it when I'm cutting. I'm not putting a ton of pressure, just enough to keep the tip in the metal. It may look like my fingers are squeezing the graver, but they're just balancing. Everything is a balance. Once the tip of your graver is in the metal, the piston drives your graver forward, so you're not having to push. It's just about control. You want to offer yourself enough pressure and enough of a hold to be able to control the graver. Like I said, the most important part is actually the vise spinning. That creates smooth radiuses. That creates the smoothness of the scroll. One of the best pieces of advice I got when I was a beginner, when I first began, let's put it that way, was that some of the best engravers that I admired, they advised me before I started cutting metal to learn to draw. Learn to draw a scroll first. If you can draw it, you can cut it. Of course, I didn't listen to that advice because I was so excited to cut metal. That's immediately when you get your handpiece, the first thing you want to do is sit down and cut. It's natural, but it's also self-defeating because if you don't know how to draw a good scroll, then it doesn't matter. You're going to follow really bad lines. If you're following really bad lines, the end result isn't going to look great. My very beginning stuff before I took class it's very spotty. It's not good at all. My stuff now is not good at all, but I have a good understanding of what scroll is, the construction of scrolls, and how to draw them. Before I do anything, I make sure that my scroll shape is as perfect as possible, that the ratio and the way that it's laid out is going to be such that the leaves, when they're placed within the scroll, are going to look natural and they're going to have a good flow to it. As a beginner, I've sought out a lot of advice, I've tried to ask a lot of questions of a lot of people that, are simple questions, but they're important questions to me that I didn't understand when I first started. And I think one of the most important things that was reiterated to me over and over was that when you are engraving and cutting scroll, that the only way to make it look natural is to have a good flow. A good construction of leaf shape, the form, the placement. And the only way to get there isn't by cutting scroll, it's by drawing scroll. So it's very surprising to me when I first started to hear how many people advised me to draw. And I still probably don't draw enough. If I look at incredible people out there that are doing things that eventually, at a level that I eventually want to get to, I know that they're drawing more than me. And so that's one of my resolutions, is to draw more, draw more, draw more. I could see myself doing a video on drawing in the future, so maybe look forward to something like that. Simple scroll, cut cleanly and cut well, is better than complex scroll, cut poorly. So I have to keep that in mind as a beginner. Now, as I'm trying to improve my engraving, and I admit that I'm a slow learner, I'm a slow engraver, my goal has to be to try to make my work as clean as possible. Eventually, I want to do very complicated things, foldovers, intertwining scrolls, etc. But now, it's all about really focusing on engraver control, focusing on being accurate, learning my tools, learning the craft, and improving with each design that I do. I would rather be clean and accurate than complicated and fancy. So, hopefully over the next year or so, I'll start growing in the way that I can add in a lot more ornamentation and decoration to the leaves, to the scrolls, etc. But for now, I think I'm happy with my slow progress, and I'm looking forward to seeing how much I can grow in the next year, and what direction I can grow in the next year. Now, I've mentioned keeping your tools sharp, and shortly you're going to see my tip break. And as I'm cutting, it's very obvious that this happens because the tool slips. What reason this happens, I'm not sure. There could be a hard spot in the metal. This happens sometimes. I know that in this area there are pins that go through to attach the flat ruler part to the larger square, the larger mass of the square part. There are some pins. I don't know if those are hardened pins. I don't know if they're a different type of steel. But sometimes when you're cutting, you might hit a very hard part of the metal that will tip the we're talking about a microchip on the tip of your engraver. They can cause all kinds of problems. There it was. You saw it just now happen. And the only thing left to do at this point is to resharpen and start cutting again.